As we have been reporting, President Biden has ordered the deployment of some 3,000 troops to Eastern Europe, namely Romania and Poland. That is separate from the 8,500 personnel put on high alert last week. The move comes as the buildup of Russian troops continues along its border with Ukraine, despite the U.S. calling for de-escalation. Natalie Brand has the latest.
The Pentagon says it's deploying more U.S. forces to Eastern Europe at the request of NATO allies concerned Russia will invade Ukraine.
We are making it clear that we're going to be prepared to defend our NATO allies if it comes to that. Hopefully it won't come to that.
2,000 soldiers will be leaving from Fort Bragg in North Carolina to posts in Germany and Poland. Another 1,000 troops will be moving from Germany to Romania.
These are not permanent moves. They are moves designed to respond to the current security environment. Moreover, these forces are not going to fight in Ukraine. They're going to ensure the robust defense of our NATO allies.
Today, the Russian Ministry of Defense released this video showing its army conducting joint military exercises with Belarus near the border.
There is one aggressor here. That aggressor is Russia. They are the ones who have gathered tens of thousands of troops on the border. They are the ones who are threatening to invade a sovereign country.
Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have been pushing to send more resources to Ukraine and NATO allies in a show of U.S. support against the Russian threat.
Send the Ukrainians weapons they can fight with, anti-tank weaponry, ground-to-air missiles. Give them a chance to inflict some real damage on the Russians if they, in fact, come in.
U.S. officials say Russia has shown no clear signs of de-escalation, but the State Department continues to urge Russian President Vladimir Putin to pursue diplomacy. Natalie Brand, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
For more on all this, I want to bring in Democratic Congressman Colin Allred from Dallas, Texas. Congressman, it's great to see you. You recently returned back to Washington, or the United States, from Ukraine. You were part of a congressional delegation there. What did you see? What is your sense of things?
Well, I saw that Vladimir Putin has succeeded in doing something that few others could, which is really to unite our NATO allies, to unite the EU and our EU allies, and really to unite the United States Congress in opposition to his aggression. And I really felt that throughout the entire trip. We began in Brussels, speaking with our NATO allies and our EU allies, and then went to Kyiv. And really, I think we're all kind of reading from the same hymn book. There are some small differences here and there, but by and large, we are united in standing up to Vladimir Putin.
What was the atmosphere in the capital city of Kyiv? Was it tense? Are people nervous?
Well, I've actually heard that it's kind of emptying out, and so there is some tension going on there, and there's some concerns, obviously, about the buildup to the north there that would allow them to come directly into Kyiv, and there's some concern around that. But I was really impressed with the Ukrainians I met with just how they're getting on with their lives, and I met one young woman who told me she was going to get her white wine and her Kalashnikov and defend her country. And I got to say, I believed her. I believe in their sense of identity. I believe that they don't want to go back to being a Russian puppet. And I believe that anything Vladimir Putin does is going to be a miscalculation from him.
Do you believe moving troops to neighboring countries around Russia and Ukraine is prudent?
Yeah. Well, in this case, the Russians have moved into Belarus. They put troops on the borders of our Article 5 NATO allies, meaning that we are bound to protect them should they be invaded. And so I think it's a prudent move for us. When I spoke with our NATO allies from that region, the Balkans, and also the Polish, they were requesting that at the time. They know that if American troops are there, it's less likely that they will be invaded or have an attack on their territory, because that means it would bring in the full force of NATO. And so that's part of why they're going there. But as it was said in the earlier segment, they're not there to go into Ukraine, and the Ukrainians are not asking for us to send troops to go into Ukraine.
So this is a question that might be on the lips of your constituents. I gather it's on the lips of many Americans. It's kind of a basic question, but I think it's worth asking and getting your perspective on. For the United States, what is at stake in Ukraine, and what is our strategic interest?
Yeah. Well, Ukraine is a fledgling democracy, and they are really trying, and they have tried in recent years, to form a national identity that's separate from Russia. And I believe that every state should have the chance to determine their own fate, that every people should have the chance to determine their own way forward. And the Ukrainians overthrew a Russian puppet and decided to go and have elections. And they elected leaders who would allow them to move closer to the West, to form a trade deal with the EU, to try and seek NATO membership. That's the path they want to follow. And what Russia is trying to do here is to tear them back in a way that we really haven't seen since the 1930s, by sending tanks and hundreds of thousands of troops to try and threaten a democratic neighbor into leaving their orbit. And our national interest here is one, I think, that's based on democracy, based on our own shared belief that everyone around the world should have the right to choose their own path, and that we can't allow borders of countries to be changed by tanks.
Does our strategic interest extend to bringing NATO and Ukraine together? That is to say, if Ukraine asks, should NATO membership and all the obligations that come with it in that defensive alliance be extended to Ukraine?
Well, there are a lot of different models that could be followed. They could go the Finland route and, sort of be a little bit independent, or they could continue to seek NATO membership, which they have sought now for several years. There are some requirements, as you said, to join NATO. It's not just that you can say, I'd like to be a member, then you get access to the protection of NATO. But listen, it can't be decided by Vladimir Putin putting 100,000 troops on their border and threatening them. That is not how we decide things. NATO is a defensive alliance. It's a defensive alliance that people join and countries join on their own, voluntarily. It's not a bloc. It's not a military buildup to try and threaten Russia. And so if that's the path that Ukraine wants to take, then that's something we have to consider, and that all of our NATO allies will have to consider together. But it's certainly not going to be one that Vladimir Putin is going to dictate by sending 100,000 troops to the border and threatening to kill really thousands of the Ukrainian people.
Having been to the capital city of Ukraine and now returning to the United States, is there anything you or your colleagues on that congressional delegation believe the administration could or should be doing that it isn't doing now?
Well, I actually think that they're working quite well with President Zelensky and his administration. We've sent $650 million of military aid to them, I think, in fiscal year 2021. We're a third of their military budget is provided by the United States right now. We're also going to be providing them with economic aid. And that's the thing I think that is the next step. Because, Major, what's been happening is the buildup of Russian troops and the uncertainty that that has already caused a hit to the Ukrainian economy, forcing them to take steps to try and stabilize their economy, to stabilize their currency. And so that's where we can help them going forward. Because what we don't want to have happen is for Vladimir Putin to succeed by building up these troops and destabilizing the government and destabilizing the country without having to actually invade. We don't want to have him get some success just by destabilizing in that way.
You mentioned a brave woman making a reference to her white wine and her Kalashnikov. As a serious matter, do you believe Ukraine is in any position to defend itself?
It's a good question because obviously military to military, they are not in a position to have a direct fight and win that. That's clear, and there's really no scenario in which we, through our own aid, can change that in the next weeks, months, even years. It's a process that would take decades for them to reach that level of military buildup, and it's probably not in Ukraine's interest to pursue that route. But they have been at war with Russia since 2014, and they have learned a lot about how to fight them. And I think if the Russians do invade Ukraine, they will find a much more determined, much more organized, and really a very strong resistance from a people that does not want to go back. And that's the main thing is, as you and I both know, if someone were to come to our home and try and change who we were from the outside, the resistance that they would meet would be severe. And that's what I see in Ukraine. They really have developed a strong sense of national identity, one that maybe didn't even exist as strongly before 2014. And they don't want to go back. And that's why I think whatever happens, Vladimir Putin is going to emerge strategically weaker from this. I think this is a miscalculation from him, and I don't think it's going to work.
Congressman, you were recently diagnosed with COVID. First of all, how are you doing?
Well, you might be able to hear a little bit of it in my voice. I have a slight, what I would call cold. So, thank you for asking. I'll just say I know that I have mild symptoms because I have been fully vaccinated and boosted. And so I'll just encourage anyone out there who's watching this, get your vaccine, get your booster shot. We don't want to see anybody get seriously ill from this. It's a very contagious variant that's out there. You never know when you're going to get it. take care of yourself and your family.
Congressman, I'm a semi-trained professional observer. I note the jersey in the background. Any thoughts on the upcoming Super Bowl?
Oh, man. I don't know. I feel like this is one where it could go either way, and I don't really have a dog in this fight. But I'll say this. What I always say is, turnovers and special teams. Watch for that. So that's my kind of prediction. Watch who makes the most turnovers, who plays the best in special teams. As a former kind of special teams ace, that's something that I always try to tell people to pay attention to.
And for the audience that may not know, quickly tell them why you know a little bit about this.
Well, I did spend 5 years playing linebacker for the Tennessee Titans a lifetime ago. And, I certainly, this has been probably the most exciting, playoff series that I've ever seen. Every game going down to the last second. Either way, I think teams that have made it are definitely there on merit.
Congressman Colin Allred, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Major.